Hi, welcome to the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, and this is broadcast number 5. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you might say, well, on YouTube, there doesn't seem to be a number 4. Well, that's because the last one that we actually put onto YouTube has been taken away by YouTube. But we are bastions of free speech here, so we say what we're going to say. So if you're watching on YouTube, by the way, please consider going over to our Rumble channel. It's advert free. It's where you can have a free speech, true free speech platform. And you just need to go to rumble.com and search for UK MFA and sign up there and follow. Give us a thumbs up. There's a follow option on Rumble. But if you want to stick to YouTube, that's fine. Just click the subscribe button and that'll be good for us. Now, also use the notification bell on either YouTube and I think there's a similar thing on Rumble, and you'll be notified when the next video is released. Please do go to our webpage, ukmedfreedom.org. The address is on screen. All our content is available there for you, all of our campaign details. And you can also make a donation if you wish, or buy us a coffee, which helps us keep going. It just gives us a bit of finance to continue with our work and with our campaigns. Now, we always ensure, as I said, that our guests are afforded the right free speech. But views expressed during our interviews and broadcasts are not necessarily the views of the UK Medical Freedom Alliance. So with that in mind, we continue with our broadcasts, and I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Anne McCloskey. Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sorry about our technical issues, but I think we're now on board with the recording. We wanted to catch up with you regarding your recent interactions with the GMC and your High Court appearances. Obviously, you know far more about this than I do, so I'm very happy for you to really tell us the story, and then perhaps I can ask you some questions as we go to clarify. But how did this all start?
I sometimes ask myself that same question. Well, I suppose I had retired from general practice, and I went back to work to answer the call for doctors that were needed during this dreadful pandemic. And at that time, as I said, retired, but I hadn't actually gone off the radar because I got myself involved. Well, I've always been a political animal, but I got elected to the local council. So I was deputy leader of an all Ireland political party called Aontú, and I was the northern leader. And as I say, I was a representative on Derry and Strabane District Council. But nevertheless, as I say, I heard that there was a medical crisis, so I went and got myself reinsured and offered my services. So I did locums in the practice that I was senior partner in before I had retired. And I worked in Western Urgent Care. And I suppose there I saw not the dread pandemic that was appearing on our television screens every night, but a population that had been more or less abandoned by the NHS. As a GP, I used to see 30 patients a day, maybe do a couple of home visits, deal with triage, maybe a couple of dozen phone calls, do bales of scripts and all of that. Didn't go away, but we just weren't doing it. And people were being left to more or less cope, unless you had this new magic mystery illness. Right. And the NHS really wasn't available to you. So I did a couple of shifts in Western Urgent Care, which is our GP out of our service. And I also did one shift, which in retrospect, I now understand I wasn't meant to do, at the GP COVID assessment centre. And when I was there, I saw that the rock docs, our local media GPs, were standing outside the hospital talking about war zones and bodies everywhere. And these are words that they were using regularly.
Yeah.
So in the 4-hour shift that I was there, I counted 19 staff. There were 3 doctors, there were 7 or 8 nurses, there were quite a few ancillary staff, porters, receptionists, whatever. And in those 4 hours, we 19 staff saw 3 patients, none of whom really needed to be seen. One, comically enough, had bought a SATS monitor. A young man bought a SATS monitor off the internet and didn't know how to operate it. So his SATs were 30. Probably the battery's in wrong or something.
Right.
And, this was the sort of stuff. So I was talking about this to my colleagues, and I was talking about it. I mean, I'd written quite a few articles for the local media, because I was very aware. I'd been watching people like Dolores Cahill and people like Ivor Cummins, Dave Cullen, local commentators who were very much looking at the statistics behind all of this. I was also aware of internationally that this was actually a very low consequence infectious disease. And in fact, here in the UK, if I remember rightly, it was demoted from being a highly consequential infectious disease on, I think, the 19th of March.
I think that's about right. Yeah, it was about nice.
In my role as a councillor, I told Derry and Strabane District Council about a week before St. Patrick's Day, which is the 17th of March. I told them we didn't have to cancel the St. Patrick's Day parade, that all was well. And I sort of thought this would be welcomed and people would be going, oh, great, that's wonderful, and Anne is the doctor and she's a scientist and she's seen the data and it's all good. And the fact that the disconnect between reality and what actually I was seeing as a practice physician was just phenomenal. So I wrote a few articles for the local press, and back in those heady days of March, I remember saying, one of them started off, I wish we could go back to talking about Brexit.
Right. Simple conversations.
Yeah. I was nostalgic for the conversations about Brexit.
Yeah.
But so I wrote a few articles really talking about the harms of lockdown, particularly for children and young people, and what we were seeing in practice, which was the absolute tsunami of mental health problems, which a lot of the lockdowns uncovered. Domestic problems, suicidality in young people, loneliness, particularly, as I say, I have a nice garden and a barbecue, and for my family it was okay. But if you were on the 9th floor of an apartment block or something with children and maybe a not wonderful relationship,
I was going to say, with an abusive husband or something like that, so you're in a prison cell basically with the worst criminal next to you.
Yeah. So I mean, as I say, a lot of the doctors. So if you worked in the did your 4-hour shift in the out of hours centre, you got the rest of the COVID GP assessment centre. You got the rest of the day off. I mean, the town was thronged with relaxing medics. Right. Cycling, running, jogging, mountain climbing. It was great. But and the GP COVID assessment centre was in the outpatients of what it should be a busy district general hospital with a throughput of a couple of hundred people a day getting their normal stuff. So anyway, I was commenting in the local press about all of this, and right back early on, well, certainly from the beginning of 2021, I was emailing everybody I could think of. I emailed my GP colleagues. I emailed the Chief Medical Officer, Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Minister for Health, offering them to debate this publicly and, let's sit down and have a conversation. I was harassing, I suppose is the correct word to use, the local radio station, saying, let me on. I have something that I need to say here. And it wasn't possible. So at this stage, as I say, I mean, the email trails were all available. And then came the JAGs, and I sent an email to our Chief Medical Officer, I think in February 2021, pointing out the excess mortality, which was apparent in the nursing homes within the first month or two after the rollout of the jabs in those facilities. And it was hugely concerning. And I'd already read, the molecular biology of papers going back to 2005 talking about this new technology, this mRNA technology, which had never before been trialed in humans. And the animal trials at that time, this is going back a few decades, didn't go well. that they've been trying to make a coronavirus vaccine for quite a while without any success whatsoever. And all of a sudden it was apparent that this was to be given to 7.8 billion people on the face of the planet, it seemed.
Right.
Talk about equity and how we're going to get it to people who can't pay for it. And it was just there. This was a disease with the average mortality being older than the all-cause mortality historically.
Right. Yeah.
And, that was really not a problem for people who hadn't already got 4 or 5 serious comorbidities. So when I was speaking out about this, I did get, and I was making videos then, I was so frustrated because, there was no way of the paper stopped carrying my articles. They were saying, oh, Anne, people are fed up listening to you. And, but it wasn't that. It was because I was saying stuff that was new and they were carrying all the other stuff, but it just the shutters came down on any possibility of an alternative view. And, as somebody who I was a child of the civil rights movement, talking about, dignity and talking about rights, talking about the ability, and I'd marched against censorship of political opinion in Ireland.
Right.
And all of a sudden here I was in the receiving end.
Yeah.
So.
And it wasn't just you either. It was colleagues of yours, and as you say, people like Dolores Cargill and Ivor were being also sort of suppressed, weren't they, and cancelled?
Totally. It was. I mean, looking back, I was looking actually on Substack. I think it was Hugh McCarthy did a resume of the lockdowns. We actually, I think now 3 years later, forget the horrors of what they did.
Yeah.
They funny. I'm going to be jumping forward and backward here. It's a bad habit I have. I was in court yesterday.
Yeah.
For walking on a beach in March 2021.
Oh, wow.
I'll tell you about that later on. But anyway, back to what happened then was because I was working, I was seeing people who were injured. And the fact that we knew that this was, at this stage, I'd seen the Pfizer documents. I'd heard the Brooke Jackson, the Ventavia whistleblower, talking about how these trials were a farce. There was no independent supervision, that they were unblinded, that there was actually no control group, because after 6 months the placebo group were given the product. Yes. And it was just like everything else. We seem to have thrown the rule book of science into the rubbish tip. Yeah. Even the death certification, where if you're going to have a new novel disease, you got to measure it the same way as we've measured things historically. You can't then have a new paradigm, a whole new set of ways of assessing things. Mm-hmm. So this day, anyway, on the 21st of August, which was a Saturday, 2021, I came in from a shift. I'd worked until midnight the night before, and then I did a morning shift in one of the local out-of-hours centres. And I had seen and spoken to so many people who had medical problems and who were being told. And the one that really upset me was a young woman who had an upper arm clot, an unprovoked upper arm clot, which I have never, ever seen. But in the hospital, she was told that whatever the cause of it was, it could not have been her injection. And to me, that was just ludicrous. So I suppose that day I was angry. I mean, at this stage, I hadn't been sleeping at night for a while because I could see so clearly what was going on. And I knew that this was evil, I'm afraid is the only word I can use.
Yeah.
And I came in from that shift, and at that time I knew that it was the big jab weekend. It was a big push at that time in August to get the young people. And we had I produced a leaflet, and we got, I think, 50,000 copies of it. And it really was just a very referenced, using government data. We used the NISRA, Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency data, and the ONS data, looking at the risk of these. So it was tailored particularly for children and young people. And it was for parents and for the older ones, telling them about these things being in clinical trials, about the fact that there was no indemnity. And we were given these outside schools to parents and whatever. And the principals in the school were calling the police for us. I just thought, this is insane. But anyway,
but I have to say though, also it's not like it was me doing this, you know, who's a non-medical person who was only just following, you know, my nose, doing investigations and producing leaflets and handing them out. This is someone who's medically trained, who has had first-hand experience over and over and over again. And you're reacting to what you've actually seen, what you've experienced. You've looked at the history of the people that are coming in to see you, and you're making your medical assessment based upon your expertise. They still don't believe you, and they still call the police on you, which is just remarkable.
Well, I mean, again, I can't sort of attribute motives to people, but it seemed that the schools had some sort of an incentive to make sure that the uptake was high. Or maybe they believed the propaganda, I have no idea. But we could show clearly that the leaflet showed that the risk to children was statistically zero. Right. Absolutely zero. Yeah. And at this stage, we had freedom of information request looking at morbidity and mortality stats in that age group. Mm. And I mean, as we know, this just wasn't a risk. And even through the bigger picture that it was similar to a flu year, a bad flu year, there was nothing, you know, in the year 2020, across this beautiful planet, there was no statistically significant increase in age standardized all-cause mortality anywhere, and yet there was this dread pandemic.
And I think other respiratory diseases kind of disappeared, didn't they? Because I remember I downloaded the ONS statistics myself, and I think up to March 2020 there was something called respiratory disease, which was supposedly, I think, taking about 1,500 people a week or something. And then all of a sudden that was zero, and then there was something called COVID-19, which had the same figure for the remainder of the year.
But what was worse then was they produced this test, which gave you COVID-19 and alleged respiratory disease without symptoms.
Right.
And again, that was why I had to resign from Derry and Strabane District Council, because I did say that if they locked the town down again, the second lockdown, on the basis of a test which didn't test anything,
right,
in healthy people, then that I would resign. So it was a fairly short political career I had. So, but yeah. So on this day anyway, I came in from the shift and I was distraught. I was upset. I was tired, but emotionally drained. And I just said, I have to talk about this. Mm. So I made a video in I think not in this sitting room, but in the wee room, my wee office out the back. And I just told the public about what I'd seen. Mm. And I stuck it up on social media. And I did talk about the girl with the clot in her arm, who was told by a hospital consultant that, you know, she must, he sort of kept saying to her, you must have done something, you must have hurt yourself. And eventually she said, well, yeah, I work out, I go to the gym 3 days a week. Aha, you must have hurt yourself at the gym. You know, that was the level of the science that was being applied to this.
Yeah.
So I made the video and stuck it up. This was on Saturday night. Now, unknown to me, Professor Sir Michael McBride had just signed off a protocol to give the Pfizer-BioNTech BN.2.162b2 jab to children and young people. Now, this is the one that had been used, as in the UK, it was used in Northern Ireland. The British government bought 40 million doses of it. And, you know, that was what was being given. That was a non-licensed product. It never was licensed.
No.
And I knew that. So I told people, as in the leaflets, that this was an unlicensed product, that it did not, it had a conditional marketing authorization on the premise that there was no other treatment available for whatever this was, but that it was not licensed. Now, it's not unlawful to give an unlicensed product to somebody, but you must get their informed consent. They need to know that it is being used. And it happens, you know, we use things all the time off-label, you know, sometimes for children that are don't have a child's license or whatever. As long as you explain that to people, explain the risks and give that tailored advice, that's okay. And under the Montgomery Principles, which was 2015, I think, Montgomery versus Lancashire, or Lanarkshire, Lanarkshire, that it's very clear that you must tailor the advice to each person's situation. And for me, to offer this to a child without saying it's unlicensed and it's for something that's not going to harm you, it was nuts. Yeah. And at that time too, the human medicines regulations have been changed so that it wasn't doctors or nurses who were necessarily given these. I mean, dental technicians, physios, and these people, chiropodists, these people are, I admire, respect their professional skills, absolutely, but they cannot give informed consent for a parental injection of any vaccine or medical product, countermeasure, call it what you will. So anyway, I made this video, but unknown to me, Professor Sir Michael McBride must have had insomnia and he watched it, or somebody sent it to him, and he emailed at 11:15 on that Saturday night to the responsible officer for the GP performers list, called Margaret O'Brien, and also to the local GMC rep, a girl called Jane Kennedy, I believe, and also I think on that first email was to the GMC liaison officer, and saying, is this doctor on the performers list? If so, I would wish that this is reviewed. Now that was grooming. It was the chief cook and bottle washer, if you like, making his displeasure known to essentially people who were way down the food chain, and telling them that they had to act.
Wow.
So by Monday morning, they then had this Zoom meeting with a sort of wider group, and by Monday lunchtime, I had my license removed, or my was removed from the performers list, and the GMC referral had been made. Now the GMC, I'd had a conversation with them about a year previously. Maybe in January of that same year, January 21, given out about essentially my videos, which I was talking about PCR tests, I was talking about asymptomatic spread, I was talking, but it was all based upon science. It was all based upon published articles that I'd read. I mean, I wasn't just making this stuff up.
Sure.
So essentially, they said if you're not giving advice to a patient, which will cause them harm, there's very little we can do about it. That was grand. And I think they said something about you should moderate or contemplate your actions. So I contemplated them and decided that as an ethical doctor, I had no choice but to carry on. And the rest, as they say, is history. I went in to do a shift that night, 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock. I was the only doctor on duty in a city of 120,000 people. And I was told that I was no longer on the performers list. And let's face it, Ian, I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
So I've been battling them since. I submitted the corruption in all of this is quite it's stunning. First of all, the email trail, which had taken place prior to my removal from the performers list, wasn't made available to the first interim order tribunal in the General Medical Council. I had a firm of lawyers selected to represent me who do medical work by my insurance company, the Medical and Dental Defence Union of Scotland, I think, who did not submit. I wrote a 40-page paper, again, fully referenced, talking about the precautionary principle, talking about informed consent, talking about public interest disclosure, talking about whistleblowing, talking about the protected status of whistleblowing according to the GMC's own documents and rules.
Yeah.
So this 40-page paper, the solicitor didn't give that to the first IOT. Instead, the barrister, which was appointed by them, I wasn't allowed to speak. You have to appoint this legal people. We are rendered silenced by the system. This is a medical doctor going in front of people. There was one doctor, but the rest were non-medical.
Right.
To defend what I had done. And the paper that I wrote was not given to that first IOT. And I only found this out fairly recently. I was horrified.
It's amazing.
It's quite incredible. But so let's say maybe the solicitor wasn't, I don't know, I don't know. But But the GMC did not give that IOT the email trail or any of the information which I had used. So this barrister obviously used the paper I'd written and sort of said, and they keep trying to talk about human rights and freedom of speech. No, human rights are able to be qualified. I have inalienable rights.
Sure.
Freedom of speech, freedom of association, all of that. So, yeah.
It seems that just basic ethics, I mean, we talk about medical ethics and bad enough that they seem to have been thrown out of the window already by the time you were involved in at that time. But it seems like the other ethical side of it, just ethical performance in humanity and operating legal systems, which also have an ethical basis. It seems like that wasn't being followed either.
It's truly horrific, you know, now, as you'll know, we have a situation which was utterly predictable. Yes. With, you know, across the developed world where these things were given a quantity, we have 20%, up to 20%, you know, and okay, it's difficult to get the figures, but it looks like, you know, somewhere between 10 and 20% excess all-cause mortality. Mm. But the scary thing is that it's worst in younger age groups.
Yes.
This has never happened before in human history. Mm. That nobody will look at it. I had a rapid response published in the British Medical Journal a fortnight ago saying, look, apparently there's somebody on the editorial staff of the BMJ who was putting up an anonymous crowdfunder to get people to take a case against the General Medical Council for not censoring misinformation spreaders faster and harder.
Wow.
I mean, this is literally Alice in Wonderland stuff.
Yeah.
So I wrote a rapid response saying, look, I was mentioned in the article, you know, being one of these nefarious misinformation spreaders. I'm proud to say. So I wrote this rapid response saying, look, this is simple. If the ONS and the Northern Ireland Statistical Research Agency and the Scottish and Welsh equivalents, I think actually the Welsh are in with the English, if they do their job, we can sort this out. Because, you know, we can decide whether this is disinformation or not. All they have to do is look at mortality and morbidity as a function of vaccination status. Mm. That's what they told us they were going to do. That's what the government promised was going to happen. There'd be robust safety checks and that all this would be, you know, and the MHRA, we will look at this. They're not. The MHRA have a database of yellow card reports, which is horrific beyond belief. And they're not looking at it. They don't seem to have a system for looking at it. They don't have enough staff, but they also are funded by the people who are causing the problem.
Right.
The MHRA, I think the figure is 78% funded by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Now that is allowed to happen in a civilized country or a democracy as we pretend we have is horrific beyond belief.
And that's also the same in the States as well. The CDC, NIH are also funded by the same people, right?
It never should have been allowed to happen. And the universities are funded by the same people. They produce the junk science.
Yeah.
And then they say, but, you know, it's the science. And if you question it, you're misinformation. It's completely seamless, this merry-go-round of falsehoods and corruption. And I mean, I never thought, I'm an old lady, but I knew there were problems, but I didn't realize that they go right to the core of the regulatory bodies. The GMC is affiliated to the Privy Council. It is essentially an arm of government. It's funded by the Department of Health.
Yes.
It is not independent.
No.
The IOT is not independent. It's a committee of the General Medical Council. And interestingly, after the Shipman inquiry, one of the recommendations from that was that the GMC and the Interim Orders Tribunal should become separate bodies. And that never, ever was implemented. Mm. You know, after Shipman, who has clouded all of our lives with red tape and all of that. But the big thing from that inquiry was not implemented. And I mean, again, I've spoken to people who said that's because Andrew Wakefield was in the wings at that time, and they wanted to make sure that his case would be you know, held up. He'd be held up to public ridicule. Mm. So there's been 3 or 4 interim order tribunal reviews, and I keep saying, are you people are you for real telling me you cannot look at facts or evidence? They can't. they have to make a risk assessment. What is it? Well, there's a phrase they use, one of these bullshit phrases. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it's about it is. It's assessing harm to patients, and I'm going, but you must look at what's happening out there, and yeah. But interestingly, talking about doctors, I was away at a pilgrimage there a fortnight ago, and I was one of my local colleagues here was away with me. A very good man. He's clever. He's and he had no idea there was a problem.
It's amazing, isn't it? It is amazing.
So that if you are in the system and you read the Department of Health stuff, and even all the freedom of informations that we gave to the Department of Health, looking for evidence of safety, they just send back their own documents which says, "Oh, we've saved." The figure varies. How many million lives have been saved by these things?
About 2 million or something, isn't it? Apparently.
Yeah, and it's just that's the answer. And I mean, again, I sent freedom of information with 10 or 11 questions, essentially asking for risk assessments in various subgroups, children, pregnant women, the elderly, immunosuppressant. They don't have it. They have no quantitative risk assessment done for any of this. None of them, including, as I say, the Department of Health. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I got suspended, and as I say, 3 or 4 IOTs, which weren't allowed to look at facts or evidence. So 18 months, they can only suspend you for 18 months, and then they have to go to the High Court seeking jurisdiction to extend your suspension. So we had a High Court battle there over May and June. Do you remember that beautiful weather? I was doing affidavits and looking through. I mean, we have proven fraud on behalf of the General Medical Council in order to have me suspended. We have proven the whole trail about licensing, which was one of the big issues that, even the responsible officer, Margaret O'Brien, had said, she said these were unlicensed when they were licensed. We have the chief pharmaceutical officer saying that they were licensed. That is untrue. Untrue. He wrote to one of the investigators and said these were licensed. No, BN2162B2, which was the one which was being given, is unlicensed.
Yeah.
The other thing about the licensing authority, the media and the GMC themselves have said, have intimated that the licensing authority is the NHRA. It's not. It was Robin Swan, our half-wit Minister for Health at that time, who signed off on these things. Right. If the people in the North had known who the licensing authority was, I think they'd have been a lot less willing to roll up their sleeves.
Yeah.
So it's the Secretary of State for Health in England,
yes,
and the Minister for Health here in the North. So all of that they had said was untrue. It's provably, using their own papers, using their own protocols, I can show that it's true. Carminati was licensed, I think it was June or July of 2021, but it wasn't being used.
No.
It wasn't being used. And the BN2162B2 didn't expire until February 2022. Again, we have a freedom of information for that. That is what was being given, including to children and pregnant women. It's a scandal. And as I say, here in this town, I know of at least 2 people who absolutely, one had a really rapidly degenerative neurological condition and she died. I was in touch with her and I'd been trying to use some of the protocols that Medical Freedom and Tess Laurie's World Council for Health and that had published, to try and ameliorate some of all to no avail. This woman ran for an hour a day. She was fit, active. She used to take the dog and run for an hour. And the first time I went to see her in the house, she was in a Zimmer frame and you could see the muscles of her chest wall fasciculating and she could scarcely speak. And she deteriorated, and she knew, and her whole family knew what it was. And yet 3 consultant neurologists, they were calling it motor neuron disease. It happened the week after her second injection. The General Medical Council are required after 18 months suspension to seek authority from the High Court to increase that suspension any further. So the General Medical Council put in an application to the High Court to have my suspension increased by another year. Now, the interesting thing about that is I couldn't care less. I will never, ever work in the NHS again. I had retired. I have my pension got and spent,
Mm-hmm.
thankfully, so
Yeah.
I have nothing to gain, but I refuse on behalf of the tens of thousands of my colleagues and doctors going forward.
Yeah.
If we cannot debate science and rationally have a conversation in the spirit of cooperation and comradeship, if we cannot do that, then our civilization is over. I mean, I said this to the judge in the High Court, what you're presiding over is the dismantling of a civilization. Because we went to the High Court, and as I say, the reason for that was I do not believe the General Medical Council have the jurisdiction to suspend doctors for any reason. Under the Medical Act, the General Medical Council's, so I don't mean for any reason, there are situations where it might be reasonable. Interestingly, there was a case here locally where a doctor had been drunk, disorderly, assault, driving while under the influence, and he wasn't suspended. And I actually have no problem with that. If the man was remorseful and just had made a dreadful mistake, that's not an issue. But whenever you're actually proclaiming science that doesn't fit with the narrative, then that's grounds for suspension, and telling the truth about licenses. So the GMC, as I say, under the Medical Act, they have a duty to, where their overarching principle is to treat patients fairly and justly. But in the Medical Act, it clearly states that where an overarching principle, I beg your pardon, is to look after members of the public. But where that is in conflict with their requirement to treat doctors fairly and justly, it clearly says in the Medical Act, I think it's section 40, that the requirement to treat the doctor fairly and justly takes precedence. And I would contend that these interim order tribunals, over a period of 18 months, which don't look at evidence, is no way treating people fairly and justly. This is against, all the fundamental principles of law. So we challenged it in the High Court, and I had a solicitor who had been working with very closely. He's a good lad. But the barrister, you see, a lot of these people are very happy inside their tribunal system, and everybody gets paid. And, they have techniques of working with one another so that the system doesn't really get challenged.
Sure.
Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. It doesn't really matter. Everybody gets paid. Everybody goes home happy. The medical insurance people foot the bill, and it's no risk. I'm not going to do that, because I do not believe you can get justice inside that system. And I've been in contact with people like Mohammed Adil, for example, he's been through the system, and they do what they do in the IOTs. You go and you deliver your high quality stuff, and they don't argue with it. They just say, "Oh no, but the government says."
Right.
That is not a system that's going to serve people. So we went to the High Court, and we have 10 unrebutted affidavits submitted to the court, stamped and signed under threat of perjury. Mm-hmm. And again, the judge kept saying he just didn't want to be there. He just kept saying, I don't have jurisdiction, but he does. Clearly, Sam White's case showed that the High Court judge has jurisdiction. This is overriding jurisdiction. This medical tribunal convened by the General Medical Council has no power compared to that of a High Court, a court of record. So we had 4 or 5 days in court. The GMC never produced an interim order. What they produced was the minutes of a meeting at which they decided I was going to be suspended. So that's a sort of a technical thing, but it's valid. Interestingly, Jerry Adams of Sinn Féin had to go to the Supreme Court to get he had an interim custody order, which wasn't signed by the Secretary of State. So the interim order is meant to go across the desk of Charles Massey, who's the registrar and chief executive officer, the registrar of the General Medical Council. I don't even know who signed the order. The order doesn't exist, as confirmed by the other side solicitors. So that was a technical thing. But the real fundamental thing is the stuff we've been discussing. Is it legitimate to question public health policy?
It seems also so that those people that have, So let's deal with the few that have. All seem to have had a very similar experience to you.
Well, it's global.
Yeah.
This is the scary thing, is this is not just in the UK. The Republic of Ireland is the same. They have an Irish Medical Council, same paradigm, same sets of rules. Yeah. And if you look right across the world, and this is happening to lawyers also, you know, we were talking about this yesterday. So you have the law, medicine, and education completely captured by a globalist. The education is now, you know, education in a country is meant to be the process whereby the accumulated learning of centuries is passed on to our young people, and they're taught to critically evaluate stuff. What they're getting now is Paulo Freire. They're being taught to be activists, Marxist activists. And that essentially is where we are. So we're having a meeting next Wednesday night locally about that. Anyway,
it's also the police and the military as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So
I'll tell you about the court yesterday.
Yeah. So, but you know, if you want to say, well, okay, well, we've discovered something that could almost be criminal, then you approach the police and they'll turn you away too. So
we actually did take. We have a crime number. We went to the police and said we believed a crime was being committed.
Yeah.
And particularly against children and young people. And we got a number, but there never was any investigation. And again, I mean, we've seen Mark Sexton and all, you know, people who are much better qualified in this than I, who have tried to do this. And so the judge, as I say, didn't want to be there. We had a 5-hour, the recording of the one that was done on the 22nd of June, I think. Apparently, and this may not come as a surprise to you, Ian, but I spoke for 2.5 hours in the court. And I might as well have been talking to the wall. When he gave his judgment, we knew we weren't going to win in that jurisdiction. There was no jury. I had about 100 supporters, and I told them to take notes, be witnesses, be aware, and they were so well behaved. I was so proud of them, because he had said, you know, that if there's any, you know, I'd clear the gallery and all of this, and they were wonderful, and they sat for hours and diligently recorded, and all of this is for the public record. This is a court of record. This is a historical occasion.
Yes, absolutely.
And justice was not done. The other side had a barrister. The barrister whom I had hoped would represent me, thankfully, in a way, said, no, I'm not happy to do it in this way. He wanted appeasement. He wanted it referred to the IOT, the Medical Practitioners Tribunal Service, and then a judicial review of that decision. Again, it's the gravy train. Everybody's happy, and the outcome doesn't really matter. But this is fundamentally going to the heart of the system. So the affidavits which we submitted, showing the whole trail of corruption and lies, were completely ignored. And the judge essentially paraphrased the opposition's arguments in his judgment. Again, it's grand, it's there. And in the court, I stood up and said, I will be robustly challenging this. And we're going to appeal it, and we'll appeal it, and we'll go to the Supreme Court if necessary. I'm not afraid. I'm not tired. I have nothing to lose. And as I say, it's not about me. This is it's exactly what your organization is for, medical freedom.
Right.
If we don't have that, then we don't have a health system. We don't have guarantees going forward that corporations won't have a monopoly over what is called health. Yeah. And that's, as we can see, is what is happening. Yeah, and the
ultimate victims
was not amused.
The ultimate victims of all this are it's little me sitting back in Essex, who needs to try and get something from a doctor and get some treatment and get something that's a bit more holistic and not some kind of treatment of just a symptom, and also knowing that when something is being dispersed around the world that's supposed to be good for us, that the doctors that we are interfacing with actually understand what that is, what that product might be, what it contains, and that can actually give you informed consent. So the ultimate victims are the people that need health support.
without a doubt. And particularly, as I say, that an experimental substance was given to unborn babies inside their mother's wombs it never has happened before in the history of medicine deliberately, to actually almost prioritize that group. It is unconscionable. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So, as I say, this is about, I have children, I have grandchildren. This is about them.
Yeah.
I'm an old lady. I've had a brilliant life. I love my work, love my life. I lived in the good years, but all of this, and that we can see now, the next thing is, no carbon by 2030.
Right.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You are the carbon there. All of that, so we need to stand up. And as I say, certainly here in the north of Ireland, it has been very strange because all of our divisions have gone.
Mm-hmm.
And the freedom movement is, I'd say, almost equally split between the Republican, Catholic, that sort of community, and the Unionist community. And I've spoken publicly with a man who's an ex-policeman, ex-army, and I would be from a rebel background, shall we say.
Yeah. And
at the end of every speech, we say, because the Orange men and the sort of the Unionists talk about no surrender. And Irish, in Gaelic, we say, Chucky our la, our day will come. So Billy says, no surrender, Chucky our la, and so do I.
Right.
That reaches to, and as I say, even right throughout this, it's just all of that stuff. And we can see that these are the tactics they use to divide us. If you look at the origins of the First World War, if it hadn't started in Europe, they were going to start a civil war in Ireland.
Right.
And let the Kaiser arm both sides.
Mm.
What you see behind the curtain, it just, whoa. So we're going to appeal. But after we had been running sort of freedom things, we had a thing called Freedom Alliance Island of Ireland. Again, an organisation. At the beginning, we were trying to get places where people could meet in safety. So we went to a beach and we had a couple of hundred people on the beach. It was great, wonderful day. The cops were there, but they didn't really bother us. And in fact, Billy, the ex-cop, had a meeting with the RUC in Nevada and had sort of more or less said, like, we're going to do this, and, had done some sort of a safety thing. So we've forgotten all about it. That was now 2.5 years ago. March 2020. March 2021, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just almost 2 years ago. Over 2 years ago.
Mm.
It's very hard to know. The years kind of meld. So the day after my High Court appearance, when I told the judge that I would be calling him as a witness for allowing fraud into his court, essentially, which is perjury. I told him that he would be called as a witness to the Supreme Court if that's where it took us. And he didn't like it. He said, I award costs to the other side. He was very grumpy about it. So I'm looking forward to hearing the tape of that. But the day after, we got 7 of us got summonses, or not summonses, but an invitation to go to court for walking on a beach.
Okay.
And this, within a day or two of that too, my daughter, adult daughter, was arrested in Dublin on St. Patrick's Day 2021 for being outside of her whatever number of kilometers.
So, yeah, 5 kilometers or whatever it is. Yeah.
She was walking with her friend. She got arrested. So she actually had, at the time, she'd lost her job because of the lockdown. She was doing events management. And not a good career in times of lockdown.
No.
And she got a job, sort of a government job, and she was stressed out about this fine. And we were trying to do it sort of in paperwork and, do you talk about rights? And she was so stressed. I just said to her, darling, pay the fine. You're not letting anybody down. There's no point in putting yourself through this. Just pay the bloody money and be done with it. So she did that. So she got a phone call from the police in Dublin. And now this is within a day or two of this High Court case, informing her that there was an arrest warrant out for her in the 26 counties. Now that was a lie. Well, if there was, we've obviously asked to see the arrest warrant and signed it. But so that looks like this is either incredibly coincidental, or the General Medical Council are actually involved in an international conspiracy to make my life a misery and those who are close to me. So here's 7 of my friends in court for something that happens long since statute barred. and my daughter being threatened with arrest. I mean, we're over the border all the time. I live within a couple of miles of the border with the Republic of Ireland. We've a house in Donegal, all of that. It's really chilling. These people are either in the death throes, it just blind panic, or else they actually don't care. Yeah. They know their God is money and their God is power, and they actually are very happy to cooperate in a system that is deceitful and intimidatory and destructive and anti-human, and all of those adjectives that we can use.
Well, you say it's either something very, very coincidental or something very, very spiteful, isn't it?
Very sinister. Well, I would say sinister. And international. This cross borders. So her phone call was from the chief of some sort of a district inspector in Dublin, and I contend it's because she's my daughter. Nobody else, the person that was with her on that day didn't get a similar phone call.
Right.
So anyway, we went to court yesterday, and the judge lost his cool because I wouldn't plead guilty or not guilty. I said I'm innocent, and he completely lost it. He threatened he was going to arrest me. This is not. They closed the court to the public. We had supporters there again. Beautifully well-behaved people, well-mannered. We sat outside for 2 hours, I think, and talked quietly among ourselves. There was no disruption. We were cordial to the people coming and going in the court. There was no. He refused. There were 3 of us in the one sitting yesterday, and they called Liam first, but refused to allow anybody into the court with him. Now that's unlawful. That court is null and void. That's against judicial procedure and rules. He wouldn't. This is a public court, and he refused to allow even his co-accused in along with him. Now, I've never seen that happening in a court. And as I say, I'm a child of the 70s here. I've never been in a court before in my life. All of a sudden, I'm an international criminal. Never been involved in any legal stuff before.
So what was the basis of the threat to arrest you then? Because so arresting you is depriving you of your liberty, right, against your will. So what had you done that would cause you to be arrested?
Well, that is a very good question. Now, whenever I was going into the court, they wouldn't allow the public. And it wasn't an unruly mob. There were maybe 10 or 15 people. Wouldn't allow them in. But my Mackenzie friend, who's a genius at law, wonderful woman, who has been at my side for the last year, working round the clock. This is hugely time consuming. I was a full-time doctor and reared 4 children. I never was busier than I am now.
Yeah.
This wasn't what I planned for my retirement.
Me neither.
So she insisted on coming in with me, and they were trying to get me down into the court, into their jurisdiction, and we had submitted paperwork which they refused to look at. We had an affidavit of status laying out the skeleton argument of why we didn't regard that they had jurisdiction for a huge. There's 50 reasons why, having to do with rights, but also having to do with the whole process. I mean, the papers that they served had random pictures of people that I've never seen. I don't know who they are, but none of them were me. It just, the whole thing was nuts. So he just lost his cool, and he was shouting and saying, I'm going to have because I wouldn't plead. And he said, I'm going to write down. I said, do you plead innocent or guilty? Or do you plead guilty or not guilty? And I said, I am innocent. And he said, I'm going to write not guilty. And I said, no, I object. I'm not pleading not guilty, because once you plead, then you're in their jurisdiction. You acknowledge their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And he said, if you interrupt me one more time, I'm going to have you arrested for contempt of court. He completely lost it. His jowls were shaking But this boy, we looked him up. He's not even a registered judge here. I think he's retired. They brought him in for the day because the younger ones won't behave in that way because they're afraid of you looking for their insurance details, and they get just put it there in the hall, Mr. Postman. Sorry about that.
That's right.
So it's incredible. And then Billy, who's the next policeman, went in and was treated similarly, and he's going. He knows he's actually been in court 1,000 times, along with people, and understands how the rules work. So, it was a really interesting day. So, we ended up, we left the paperwork, which will stand. The the whole thing has to be thrown out because the process is unlawful. They sent me the papers of my co-accused, including documents concerning, I mean, that has to be a breach of their confidentiality.
Right.
All of it is just insane.
It's just a mess,
as I say,
isn't
these
it?
people have either, I think it's like a lot of stuff when you look behind the curtain, when you expose the corruption within the legal system, and when you don't give them jurisdiction to which they're not entitled, and they know they're not entitled to it, they just lose it.
Yeah.
So it's in a way,
they're not used to being challenged, are they?
They're not used to being challenged, but I tell you, they may get used to it because it's going to keep happening.
Yeah. So how did that leave you? So he didn't hold you in contempt, I take it, in the end, because you're
right. And I didn't go down into the court.
Right.
You know, so he entered whatever he entered. He didn't tell me what he wrote down.
Right.
I have, as I say, the affidavits, and we're looking for disclosure. We're looking for police records. We're looking for evidence, all of that. None of which they have. I know they don't have it. And that was it. We went away, and I think he gave us a date for the 10th of August. But the next part of our process now is to write to the Lady Chief Justice,
okay,
and explain the way that we were treated. I mean, yes. we went there with good intent to challenge the whole process, but you're allowed to do that in our wonderful democracy, but it seems not. So yeah, it's been an interesting. But you know, if I had to make that video over again and all of them, I would do it.
Oh, I'm sure.
I would probably do it earlier.
Yeah.
You know, because it's a personal cost. My family, it's been hard on my family. You know, and it's caused conflict in the family. There's no point in denying it. I have my eldest son and his wife don't speak to me. She's a doctor. He works in a biotechnology company. He makes subcutaneous implants. He's a clever lad, PhD, all of that. He's a good boy. But they cannot, it's this thing, I've never seen it before, that you cannot respect somebody's differing opinion and move on.
It's very sad, and again, you're not alone in that. But on the other hand, I think we've all been very lucky that we've all got to meet each other and form new relationships as a result of this. And and it's lovely, and we all support each other, and we've got each other's backs, and we will overcome because of that, no doubt.
I think you're right. Yeah. That's another good Chucky our lad, no surrender, we shall overcome. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Great. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add to that, or that's brought us up to date, I guess? And
I think your listeners will probably have had enough.
Oh no, never.
No, it just, and you're right. It's been the worst time and the best time of my life. It's been intellectually and personally stimulating and interesting. It's been horrific in other ways. I did never think at 66 years of age I'd be up in court defending myself from a charge of walking on a beach with other people. You know?
It's just crazy.
It's just nuts.
A world on its head.
The last wee story I just wanted to tell you was, and this is one of the things I think about, whenever I was back working as a GP, there were a young couple with a baby of about 10, 11 months, maybe not a year yet, on their knee. And I went over, as you do, and was looking at, oh, what a beautiful baby. How you doing, wee pet? As you do. And she looked at me in horror. And I said, I'm no oil painting, but I didn't think it was really that scary. And the parents said, Anne, you're probably the first adult human face she's seen without a mask, except ours. And I went down to the surgery and cried. Just the look on that child's face. And what have we done to our children? Yeah. What have we done? It's
the word disgraceful doesn't cover it.
Kill their grandparents, all of that. Yeah. That is evil beyond description. Even if it was true, they should be protected from it.
Of course.
The fact that it's a lie, and provably so, right from the start, is so. We keep fighting. We get up every morning and get on with it. Yeah,
well,
it's game on.
Well, two things. Number one, you don't look anything like 66, so don't worry about that. And and you can be extremely proud of yourself, and I think we're very proud of you. Thanks so much for taking the time to to talk to me. And
My pleasure. Yeah.
we got
We'll
there.
meet again.
Yeah, sincerely hope so. No, thanks
after the revolution's over.
Yeah. get down on the beach and enjoy Donegal.
I will.
All right.
Okay. All right, Ian. All the
Thanks
best.
ever so much, Anne. Cheers.
Best regards to all your listeners. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.